Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here with you today and excited to be a part of your day. My name is Amy Julian. I'm the director for the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University. I'm here to talk to you today about universal design. This particular session, an introduction to universal design for learning, is the first of a three-part series that we're bringing you today. The first session is really going to be an introduction. We'll walk through the main issues of universal design. The next session will look at variability and what that looks like. And then the third session will look at universal design as it applies to the classroom. So there's a lot of exciting things to discuss and talk about today. If you do attend this session and miss another session, all of these sessions are recorded, so you're able to come back and view at a later time if you would like to. So with that, let's get started. A couple things as we go along. So I'd like to start off with just asking you a few questions. So how well do you know UDL? And I'd like you to put in the chat box there what you teach, and then how well do you know UDL? 1 would be not at all, 2 would be somewhat, 3 would be I've had a training or two, and then 4 would be I could write a book on it. So let's take a second and fill out that chat and let me see where people are. Great, thank you for completing that. It looks like we've got quite a few individuals who are kind of across the spectrum today, so that's pretty exciting. So universal design for learning is an approach to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all by setting clear, rigorous goals, anticipating barriers, and proactively designing to minimize those barriers. And that's really what we're going to be looking at, is what universal design is. A lot of the slides you're going to see have CAST here at the bottom. CAST is the national leader for UDL and has been a real big part of bringing that research forward. The definition of universal design in both the Perkins legislation and Perkins 5 and also in the Higher Education Act is that universal design is a term of a scientifically valid framework for guiding educational practice that provides flexibility in the way information is spread, in the way students respond or demonstrate knowledge and skills, and in the way students are engaged. It also reduces barriers to instruction, provides appropriate accommodations, supports and challenges, and maintains high achievement expectations for all students, including students with disabilities and students who are limited English proficient. So we're going to kind of practice what we preach today, and a couple things that we have going on that are going to allow you to really look at our environment and look at universal design. The first thing is you're able to self-regulate. So most of us are at home, and so you have that opportunity to sit anywhere you want. If you want to stand and walk around, if you want to eat, please enjoy some breakfast. If you're a fidget or a tap footer, please go ahead and do that, because that's your self-regulation. You're able to have that accommodation or modification to your environment. In addition, we're going to have the perceived environment. We're going to do some screen share. Personal copies of slides have been provided. Those should be in the handouts. And then in addition to that, you should have closed captioning on here, so you're able to look at the closed captioning. Moreover, we have an agenda, we have a chat box, we have the ability to raise our hands, or if you just want to doodle some notes down as we're going through, those are all actions that you can take. So those are things that, as you look at your classroom, which we'll get to in the third section, really looking at universal design through that lens of environment. Goals for this session, really we're going to introduce universal design, and we're going to show that the barrier is the environment, not the learner. And we'll talk about that as we go along a little bit more. First thing I want to kind of cover is that neuroscience tells us that the brain has 3 broad networks. One for recognition, the what of learning, one for skills and strategies, the how of learning, and one for caring and prioritizing, the why of learning. And those are really outlined in the core principles of not only CAST work, but all UDL work. So you look at these parts of the brain for engagement, which is the affective network, representation, the recognition network, and action and expression, the strategic network. So we're going to look at that as an exploration of how CAST has taken UDL and applied it in a little bit further detail. So how do we design learning goals, methods, materials, and assessment that work for everyone? Great question, right? Well, we start by asking what are the goals and what are the barriers? Then we infuse universal design based on those goals. The range and source of human variability in learning can be met by designing 3 principles addressing the brain's 3 broad networks. We design with multiple means of engagement in order to motivate the learner and sustain enthusiasm for learning by promoting various ways of engaging with material. And so through those 3 principles of addressing the brain's 3 networks, we design with multiple means for engagement in order to motivate the learner and sustain enthusiasm for learning by promoting various ways of learning and engaging with materials. We look at multiple means of representation. So this network senses and perceives information in the environment and transforms it into usable knowledge. And then we look for multiple means of action and expression. So the learners can organize and initiate purposeful actions in the environment. The range and source of human variability in learning can be met by those 3 design principles. So there are core concepts where you see UDL applied. One is through architecture, one is through neuroscience, and one is through learning. Engagement in practices, sustained effort, and persistence is that idea of architecture. And then the optimized relevance and value of authenticity is really that engagement with learning. So let's move forward. Ooh, there's where those are. Let's move forward into the why, the architecture. And this is really where a lot of individuals have seen universal design before. You may know universal design in architecture as an approach to design the work to ensure that products and buildings can be used by anyone, regardless of their level of ability. When a building is designed for flexibility, it can serve everyone, with or without a disability. So let's consider this. Universal design approach to learning. So applying those architectural principles into learning. What difference would it make if educators looked for barriers in design or in curriculum rather than in the learner? What if we built in flexibility in our teaching and learning? And why should we look at our design and infuse UDL? Good question, right? Well, research shows the way people learn is as unique as their fingerprints. Variability in learning is the norm. So curriculum needs to be designed from the start to meet the needs of the diverse learner. So let's take a second and look at these 3 pictures. And we're looking at for accessibility, so retrofitting of access. If you look at these pictures, can you tell me if there's anything that sticks out to you as what are some of the issues that would exist within UDL? Are they accessible to everybody? You can post some things in the chat if you'd like, or you're welcome to really look, maybe just make a note to yourself as you're sitting at home. So let's look at these. If you look at that arrow there in that first one, that door, you have the stairs. If I'm wheelchair bound, it's going to be hard for me to access that space. In addition to that, my wheelchair is about 36 inches across. So am I able to get through that gate? I don't really know. The second picture looking at disabled persons enter at the rear of the building, it's a little bit covered by that tree. So am I able to see that if I'm in a wheelchair? Maybe, maybe not. There's nothing worse than someone pulling up to the front of a building, wondering where to get out of their car if they do have a physical disability and not being able to see proper signage. So you want to be sure you have proper signage. And then this last one, that is a great ramp for skateboarding. I do not know that that would be an appropriate ramp for someone who has limited mobility. So let's take a second and look at this. I'd like you to think about who it will use this ramp, why are their handrails important, and who else may benefit. The goal is still to get to the top or bottom of the stairs. However, there are a few simple design strategies that make experience more accessible for all. I'd like you to pause and reflect on how the ramp and the handrails help more individuals achieve the goal of getting up and down and moving through this building. And who was this ramp originally designed for? Again, who else may benefit from the design? And how would you feel if you were told that only if you were in a wheelchair could you use this ramp? Food for thought. I also want you to think about universal design in architecture and where you have seen universal design before. So many of you might say, oh, this is a new concept. It came out with Perkins 5, but really universal design has been with us for about 10 years now. And we see it in our everyday life, and we see it within architecture really since ADA came out. So how many of you have walked through an automatic door lately? Especially in the era of COVID, we really are using those automatic doors because we don't want to be touching things. Anybody seen some curb cuts? Think about how if you're moving, whether you're limited mobility, but what about when if you have young kids? My kid's a little older now, but when I had kids and I was pushing a stroller, I really appreciated those curb cutouts. Also, everybody's been baking, or that's what the news tells me anyway. So when we're looking at easy grip tools, those are really wonderful for baking, peeling potatoes. That's what's shown there is a couple potato peelers. But also recently we put in a chicken coop, and a lot of hammering took place, and there are hammers that are now very lightweight and ergonomically developed so you don't get tennis elbow. So all these exciting things that we really are infusing universal design across the board. And then in addition to that, closed captioning, that's a great accommodation that is not only used in education and teaching, but also one of the things that I've heard recently is that Hamilton was released on Disney. And if you have seen that, they talk at a very fast pace. And so a lot of individuals have said it's been very beneficial to turn on closed captioning, so then you're able to catch all the things that are going on in the great film Hamilton. Just a thought there. So let's pivot just ever so slightly and look at equality, equity, and UDL. And here's some pictures that I want to show you. These are three individuals all watching a soccer match. And that first box there, that's equality. Everybody gets the same thing, everybody gets the same size box, and everybody cannot see the game. The second picture there is equity. Everybody gets what they need. So the first gentleman, he doesn't need a box. He can see over the fence. The second individual there, a little bit more vertically challenged, needs a box. And then the third gentleman, he gets two, or she gets two boxes because they need that to see over the fence. So everyone gets the same view, and it's equity. They get what they need for success. But universal design takes it a step further. Universal design says, eliminate the barrier. Look at the environment and eliminate the barrier instead of making the disability be that of the learner. Again, core concept of UDL. The barrier is in the environment, not the learner. This is a wonderful paradigm shift in the way we look at education, the way we look at how we embrace curriculum, and the way we look at accommodations. Very important, and you're going to hear me say this a couple times this morning, UDL is not a checklist of things to do. It is a lens about thinking about everything you do. So UDL is really in all aspects of life. As I said, an ergonomic hammer that helps you not develop tennis elbow, not something that you would think in everyday, you need a chemistry class, but fantastic application of UDL. So now that we've looked at the architectural side, let's look at the neuroscience. And again, we're going to go through this a little briefly because their whole next session is on variability, which is really the neuroscience behind UDL. So let's just go ahead and move in here. The old view of the brain is that you had a dyslexic brain and a normal brain, and that all normal brains were created equal. That's not true. Neuroscience now has learned that variability is the norm. Variability is really exists in everyone, and everyone is as different as your fingerprint. Again, we're going to go more into variability at our next session, but we're going to move on into the how now. So we had the why, now we're going into the how. And how is that learning part? So how do we take UDL, the variability of UDL, and move it into learning application? So UDL and the brain is that idea that there is no average brain, okay? No average brain. And the brain has incredible plasticity. The goal is to drive the nervous system. So we have the how, we have the why, and we have the what. The strategic network, the affective network, and the recognition network. So these are the three networks of the brain. These are the three components of the brain, and these are the three different ways in which we apply and look at concepts for universal design. So in the spirit of universal design, there's a PDF version of the guidelines that is available in your PDF of this presentation. In addition, you can also look at the online interactive version of the guidelines, which is available through that link there as well. And that should be in your handout. So what we want to look at now is the multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. And this is the framework of universal design. The why, the what, and the how. Within engagement, we're going to provide options for recruiting interest. We're going to provide options for sustaining effort and persistence, and we're going to provide options for self-regulation. We're also going to look at representation, so provide options for perception, provide options for language and symbols, and provide options for comprehension. And then we're going to look at the physical action. So provide options for the physical option, provide options for expression and communication, and provide options for executive function. And let's just kind of dive into this just a hair more. So the UDL guidelines are grounded in research in the learning sciences, cognitive science, cognitive neuroscience, neuropsychology, and neurosciences. And what is the range and source of human variability in learning? Well, we have the three principles: engagement, representation, and action and expression. Again, to kind of put this in more of a blown up portion, provide multiple means of engagement means that affective network monitors the internal and external environment to set priorities, motivate, and engage learning behavior, looking at how students will engage. The what is to provide multiple means of representation, so recognition network sense and perceive information, the environment, and transform it into useful knowledge. So there we go. The how students will perceive. And then provide multiple means of action and expression. This is the strategic network plan: organize, initiate, purposeful action. And this talks about how the students will act on their understanding. So how do we learn not to get eaten by a lion? Let's think about that for a second. How will the students engage with that question? How will the students perceive that question? And then how will the students act on their understanding? So do we run? The why we don't want to get eaten. The what, because it's bad. And the how. So how will learners engage? How will learners perceive and comprehend? And how will they act on their understanding? What else can we look at as we move through here? Think about how your students look at things in different perspectives. Think about how they learn, how they engage with what they're working on. Do they learn through application? Do they learn through lecture? Do you present through multiple means? Are your assessments something that gauge, is it a final exam that is comprehensive and judges them on everything that's happened through the semester, or are there grades based on a variety of different assessments? Do we have multiple means for participation? Do we have multiple means for looking at how we comprehend and judge and evaluate our students? What are the design component sources to consider when addressing variability in each network? And these we have 9 guidelines for, which is that center part right there. And so we look at, again, language symbols, expression of communication. And one of the things that's important is you look there's links in here. You look this way instead of, so you can look both diagonally but also horizontally. And we'll dive into that just a bit more here. So there's a 31-point checklist. So what are some specific practices that reduce barriers to learning in each principle? And those are listed there. So you can look at varying demand resources and optimize challenging to foster collaboration and community. So looking at maybe having cohort groups, language and symbols. Are you putting things in graphic organizers? Great expression of universal design. If you have students that need to have notes taken for them, are you supplying the notes to all the students? That's a great universal design application. Instead of just setting up a separate set of notes for that one particular student, share those notes with everybody. Why not? It's universal design. So really what I want you to take away from this is that we have 3 principles, i.e. the brain networks, 9 guidelines, the design components, and 31 checkpoints, the specific practices. And that's universal design. That is the concept, that is the idea of it, and that's really the goal of UDL, is to support expert learning. Again, universal design is not a checklist though. We're looking at ways in which we can assess the learners needing access. So the learners need access and you move through that way. The learners build understanding and you move through the build. Learners develop skills and practices, look through internalize, and learners become expert learners. You look through the goals at the bottom. So when you're looking at this guidelines and you're looking at the rubric, you want to formulate points for access, understanding, skills and practice, and also that opportunity for expert learner. So again, UDL is not a checklist. I challenge you to infuse UDL in all of your goals, in all of your everyday life. I challenge you to teach students how to learn, not just what to learn. Think about that. Do we teach them how to learn, not just what they're supposed to learn? Do we show them the application? Do we show them problem solving? Do we create critical thinkers? And then UDL varies in every context. Small changes make a big difference. And that is a key concept of universal design. In every training that I've attended, they've always said, it's not about a checklist. It's not about changing your whole curriculum. What it is about is making small little changes that will make a huge difference. And so it's small changes that do make a big difference. Those small little things you can do. Some of the things we're going to talk about in our 3rd session today are what that looks like in your classroom. Sending the presentation out so people have access to it and they can follow along if their internet goes down. Being sure that individuals have ways to communicate in the chat box. Engaging with the participants or your classmates or your students. All of those things are applications of universal design. So I'm going to start with wrap up with where I started with universal design is an approach, a scientific framework, yet an approach to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all students by setting clear, rigorous goals, anticipating barriers, and proactively designing to minimize those barriers. So what we're looking at is how do we optimize our teaching and our learning for all students by teaching for all students. So my last little challenge for you is, what was your takeaway from today and what questions do you have? If you want to go ahead and post those in the chat box, what is your takeaway from today and what questions you have? And then I'm going to show you this last slide here, which is our ICSPS website. And so we have a special session under CTE. If you go to CTE, there's a drop down and it says Universal Design for Learning. We have a 2020 UDL series that has been put together by CAST. We have a plethora of Universal Design for Learning resources, and I invite you to go on and explore. And if you have not checked out the CAST website, there are some great resources there, which we're going to be talking about throughout my series this morning. So thank you all for joining me, and I hope you have a great day.